Hello, this is Ron Mackey coming to you again from Las Vegas with the 7th reading from my book, Parenting the Bottom Line. Everybody knows that a baby is not born with a wealth of knowledge when they come from the womb. So they need to be taught from infancy to adulthood what is acceptable and what is not acceptable behavior. The problem with many parents today is that they have never taught their children to understand the connection between actions and consequences. These lessons begin with the parents because children learn attitudes from their parents. And if parents have a wrong attitude, their children will develop a wrong attitude as well. And we are all acquainted with the terrible twos. Now, the terrible twos don't have to be terrible if the parents set the behavior pattern for their child. Now, I can tell you that the parents who follow a more flexible and child-friendly approach to parenting, such as allowing their children to call them by their first names instead of mom and dad, are sending their children the wrong message. And it is a well-known fact that parents who allow their children to make their own decisions at an early age are setting themselves up for failure and humiliation as parents. Do you remember little Tommy's mother in the supermarket? Many in today's society are paying the price for the neglect of parental guidance and discipline in the raising of children over the past 40 years. And because of this neglect, we live in an overly permissive society where it's okay to use the most vulgar language in television and radio programming without restraint. And we really know that society has declined when people can proudly display four-letter words on the rear windows of their vehicles and on their bumpers without shame or embarrassment. And how is a parent to answer the question from their kindergartner or first grader when asked the question, "What is that word on the back of that car, Mommy?" Now, what about the hundreds of thousands and thousands of young people who are removed from our society and placed behind bars? Now, why are they incarcerated? Even though many of them came from loving and nurturing homes, they are there because their wrong choices placed them in their present situation. And what about children who grew up in wealthy families? A child can grow up in a wealthy family with a $500,000 home and from all outward appearances look normal and happy. But just like any middle to lower class family, there can be problems. Now, in the case of middle class families with child discipline problems, some of those parents are too busy with other activities that they can barely have time to actually sit down to eat with or have any physical contact with their children. Since they are so busy, they never even bother to ask what their children are thinking or feeling. And on top of that equation, many of those families have shattered marriages that stem from adultery and divorce, and their children are caught right up in the middle of the whole fight. And what happens to these children? Being a byproduct of this overly permissive society and a degree of parental neglect, they grow up having very low self-esteem, since little or no self-restraint and no self-discipline. So the only place that brings them any semblance of order, structure, and discipline is jail or prison, where guidance and discipline is not an option, but a requirement. So what happens to the juveniles who commit serious violent crimes? It is a very unfortunate circumstance, but they must suffer the consequences of their actions, and they must go to jail. It has to be acknowledged that there are no current rehabilitation programs for criminal juvenile delinquents who are incarcerated in institutions that have a success rate that approaches 50%. But a program with a 20% success rate is considered extraordinary, even though they have an overwhelming number of failures. It is also an unfortunate fact of life that the best place for some juveniles guilty of serious or violent crimes is jail, because that structured environment is the only place that seems to keep them under some kind of control. Now, most people may not be aware that there is a modern urban challenge in today's society. The U.S. Census 2005 American Community Survey, Nevada Corrections Department stated that just in the state of Nevada, there were approximately 91,503 white households with both parents, and 19,979 where there was only a female head of household, and both categories of households had children under 18 years of age. Among black households, there were approximately 22,735 with both parents, and 12,739 of those households had only a female head of household, and those households had children under the age of 18. In Hispanic households with both parents, there were approximately 63,070, with 12,687 homes with a female head only, and both categories had children the age of 18. And among Asian households, there are approximately 14,286 homes with both parents, and about 2,327 homes with only female heads, and both categories had children under the age of 18. Now, out of the same 2005 survey of Nevada households, there were 26,653 white males unemployed and 5,609 in prison. There were 4,903 black males unemployed and 2,873 in prison. Among Hispanic households, there were 8,492 males unemployed and 1,791 in prison. And among Asian males, there were 2,366 unemployed and 221 in prison. Native American statistics were unavailable because the sample cases were too small. As we relate statistics, the question is, why was this a problem? The only answer that can be given depends upon the types of values that the parents have instilled in their children. Now we can rest assured that the majority of these families are raising up their children with the core values of knowing the difference between right and wrong. But for those who make the wrong choices, there is a price to pay. I find it an awful shame to see children as young as 13 years old being sentenced for life without parole for adult crimes. Joe Sullivan, a black male, was sentenced to die in prison in Florida at 13 years of age for sexual assault. There was also a 14-year-old, Evan Miller, Caucasian male, who was sentenced to life without parole in Lawrence County, Alabama, 4 years ago. Antonio Russell, a black male, was condemned to die in prison in Alabama at 15 years of age. And Omar Ninham, a 14-year-old Native American male, was sentenced to die in prison in Wisconsin. It has been reported by the news media that over 2,500 teens between 13 and 17 years of age have been sentenced to life without parole in adult prisons across the United States. And another 74 documented cases where children under 14 years of age or younger have been issued the death penalty. Now, the opponents of the issue of young teens in prison for life make claims that most of the children who have been sentenced to die in prison for crimes committed at 13 and 14 years old come from violent and dysfunctional backgrounds. They also claim that they have been physically and sexually abused, neglected and abandoned, whose parents are prostitutes, drug addicts, alcoholics, and crack dealers. They claim that these children grew up in lethally violent, extremely poor areas where health and safety were luxuries their families could not afford. And by the way, what are those institutions called that are holding these young criminals who are being incarcerated at an alarming rate? These institutions are called correctional institutions. So can they blame no one else but themselves for the present situation that they find themselves in? I'm going to stop right there and stay tuned for the 8th reading from my book, Parenting the Bottom Line. Have a great day and happy parenting. And God bless you today. See you next time.